Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 12th meeting in 2020 of Scotland Social Security Committee. We've had apologies this morning from Jonah Robinson, MSP, who can't be with us, and Jamie Donlan, MSP, is attending in her place. So we will move to agenda item 1, where we'll ask Mr Dornan to declare any relevant interest. Mr Dornan.
I have no relevant interests.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr Dornan, and we now move to agenda item 2, and the committee is asked to agree item 4, that is consideration of the evidence we'll hear today at agenda item 3, to be taken in private. And given the online nature of this meeting, I will assume silence as being permission to take the item in private. So I'll just check then that we can take item 4 in private. Okay, that being the case, that's agreed. We now move to agenda item 3, which is the Scottish Government Social Security Programme, and the committee will take evidence from Shirley-Ann Somerville, Cabinet Secretary for Social Security and Older People, Anne McVeigh, Deputy Director of Social Security Policy and Reserve Benefits, and Alison Byrne, Deputy Director of Social Security Programme, Scottish Government, and also from David Wallace, Chief Executive, Social Security Scotland. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I know it's not that long since we've had you in before, but we are keen just to keep a weather eye, if you like, on the delivery of Scotland's Social Security Programme given the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And I maybe start by asking the Cabinet Secretary if she wants to make an opening statement to the committee.
Thank you and good morning, Convener. Since my last update at the end of April, Social Security Scotland continues to deliver much needed benefits for the people of Scotland. Across the programme and agency, teams are progressing the priorities I previously outlined. We plan to deliver the Scottish Child Payment and Child Winter Heating Assistance by the end of 2020, subject to DWP's ability to work with us and provide the necessary data on time. We'll also roll out Job Start Payment when it can be safely managed. We are continuing to work at pace on delivering as we replan. As well as preparing to launch these 3 benefits, we continue to progress the disability benefits for launch next year and are enhancing our cross-cutting systems. This infrastructure work will move us from manual to more automated processes in many areas. This is important to ensure our systems scale safely and effectively to the larger benefits without compromising on client experience. But we are working in challenging circumstances. Our resources reduced as some staff have been loaned to the central COVID-19 response, and many are balancing work with caring responsibilities, which mean they are unable to work all their hours. I'm proud to be supporting and prioritising staff well-being so they can give their best during this difficult period. There is no pause here. All capacity is committed to delivering the 3 benefits this year, ensuring the agency can still pay people and ensuring we are preparing for an increase in demand following the surge in universal credit claims. The agency continues to deliver low-income benefits, which, with over 6,000 applications in March, more people than ever are accessing. Increase this month's agency support to carers in receipt of carers allowance. The coronavirus carers allowance supplement is not application-based and has not needed new agency processes or new data from the DWP, meaning we can deliver it without affecting other work. The additional £230.10 will be paid this month alongside the normal supplement. 83,000 eligible carers will therefore receive £460.20 in June. This is an example of action we can take through Scotland's social security system to assist those who need our support. But we are only responsible for 15% of social security spending. The majority of welfare remains reserved, in particular low-income benefits with a housing element. Within the limits of our powers and finances, I'm looking to the long term and considering how we can manage recovery and restart after lockdown, facing the economic and social harms caused by the pandemic. With the Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government, we have established a Social Renewal Advisory Board to embed the learning from these extraordinary times and to identify actions to reduce poverty and disadvantage and advance equality. To support people as quickly as possible, we are focusing all available resources on delivering the Scottish Child Payment by the end of the year. This targets low-income families, helping reduce child poverty in Scotland. At a time when thousands more people need help from social security, this support is even more crucial, and our focus, our time and our finances are targeted on introducing this new important benefit. The agency is operating and people are being paid the money they need when they need it. So that this can continue, we must avoid putting additional pressure on the agency or programme. Asking them to take on more risks does jeopardise the Scottish Child Payment delivery times, which risks the outcome for families and child poverty. I am committed to delivering new benefits as soon as we can reliably and safely do so, and I will, of course, continue to keep the committee updated. Thank you, Convener.
That's very helpful, Cabinet Secretary, and you mentioned the Scottish Child Payment there, and that's the first area that we would like to explore. I think you said in your opening statement there that you still anticipate it will be open for applications before Christmas. When would the Scottish Government anticipate the first payments being made, therefore, under the revised timetable?
Well, as I confirmed in the statement that I made to Parliament on the 1st of April, we are determined to deliver the Scottish Child Payment as soon as practically possible. As I said, I'm hoping to start taking applications for the under-60s payment by the end of 2020, with payments being made for early 2021. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to be able to give any more definitive timelines at this point, Convener. It's not a straightforward benefit to build, and it will be delivered via a series of 3 very large releases over the next few months to give the agency the functionality it needs to manage the anticipated volume options. We are, of course, as I say, determined to deliver it as soon as possible, as I absolutely recognise that the need for this is greater than ever.
I appreciate it. We just ask some technical questions around how we get to that delivery, and I don't underestimate the challenges on the Scottish Government and the delivery team. One of the things that the Government will have to do, of course, is to respond to the SCOSS report on the draft regulations. So it'd be good to know when the Government expects to respond to that report, and also when the Scottish Government expects to lay those regulations before the Parliament. That would be quite helpful to have that information.
Well, I am, as always, very grateful to the Commission for the really detailed work that they do submit in their recommendations. The Government, of course, responded and has already made some changes to the draft regulations in line with the comments that we received from the Commission during this scrutiny period, and those were detailed in an earlier position paper that we published, I think, in January. So we will hope to and absolutely endeavour to reply to the SCOSS recommendations as soon as we can. When it comes to the regulations, I'm afraid, again, I can't give exact dates for when those will be laid. It's rather too early for that. But given that we do hope to launch the benefit by the end of the year, I would anticipate the regulations being launched in autumn, perhaps shortly after the summer recess, if everything is going to plan.
Okay, now I appreciate that, and I also appreciate that it's broad brushstrokes in terms of the timeline that you're given, because as soon as you pick a date, there could be slippage through no fault of government or the wider delivery team. But it's quite helpful to be, get as much information on that as possible. So please do keep the committee updated. Now, we get one of the reasons for delays, and you said in your open statement, was in relation to staff recruitment and staff being redeployed to frontline COVID-19 response activities. Could you maybe tell us how many staff still need to be recruited into helping deliver the Scottish Child Payment, and whether the agency's been able to get on with some online recruitment?
I'll perhaps bring in David Wallace, if I can, Convener, after I make some opening remarks on this. We were able to complete recruitment for those people who had already been offered posts pre-lockdown, and that's been a very challenging method of operation, as we've brought people within the agency without them ever having entered an office. They've had their material and equipment sent to their homes, and all the training has been done online, which isn't exactly ideal, but has been, I think, very successful in its process. But that is challenging. We have, as the whole of government has, had a recruitment phase during this period, which has meant that we're unable to move forward with some later recruitment rounds that we had hoped to take on. And of course, we are looking to see what innovative way that we can move forward with this as it's safe to do so, and following, of course, Scottish Government guidance. But with your permission, Convener, I might ask David Wallace to say a little bit more about where we are with the staff that are in place, and of course how those staff have been moved to support the wider agency work during this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and good morning, Convener, good morning, Committee. So yeah, I'll say something of where we are in the agency. I think it's important to also recognise that when we talk about people going off to do some other activities, that will affect the programme as well as the agency. So I'll cover it very much from the frontline sort of operations perspective. So as the Cabinet Secretary has outlined, we were relatively fortunate that for the original date, we'd planned the vast majority of our people joining in sort of May and June, and those people who are sort of successfully under the wire, so to speak, in terms of recruitment, we have been able to bring in. There are some challenges that I think we covered last time, you know, getting kit to these people around about Scotland, making sure that they're sort of inducted and trained into the organisation, and doing that in a way that we had no sort of view that that's how we would originally do it. So that has been challenging. Across the piece, we are starting to see these people come out of their online training activity. So really just around about now, what we're able to do is get these sort of first indications of how successful that training has been once we put these people into sort of a live service environment. Obviously, that's not with Scottish Child Payment at the moment. We are sort of getting them used to the Best Start grant systems as well, so they're able to do some live activity. But in terms of additional recruitment, that poses a slightly different challenge for us, whether we want to move to sort of a fully online sort of recruitment. We are exploring this with Scottish Government colleagues, but one of the areas which you'll understand we're concerned around about is any of the quality impact of bringing people in through a fully online system as well. So those that effectively had a contract before lockdown came are well embedded into the organisation, albeit virtually, and starting to flow through from that sort of training environment into live.
The policy intent around this, because anyone watching will be looking at the technicals rather than what we're trying to achieve with this payment. But just in terms of staffing, are there numbers you can give us in terms of how many staff you've got on board that are redeployed to do other activities, understandably so, that you'll then bring back online to do Scottish Child Payment, and how many pending for recruitment there are? Can you put numbers around that for me? Is that possible?
Apologies, Convener, I missed the very start of that question. I'll answer it as from my perspective then, or was that targeted at Cabinet Secretary?
No, it was yourself, Mr. Wallace. I think you're doing the delivery end of making the Scottish Child Payment work. So the case, how many staff have been deployed onto other activities that you can then put back to the front line of Scottish Child Payment delivery, and how many staff remain to be recruited, whether that be online or traditional recruitment? So can you give us some numbers around both those things?
Yeah, so there's lots of moving parts to this. When we originally planned Scottish Child Payment, we anticipated needing around about 300 additional frontline staff. We think we have around about 180 of those already in the system, brand new, sort of targeted towards Scottish Child Payment. What we've also been able to do is sort of repurpose other staff that were already inside the organisation, the most notable one being those that we brought in for local delivery. And again, the committee has had conversations about the local delivery sort of arm of the agency. Clearly, those were originally targeted at the Wave 2 benefits, so the sort of slight reprogramming of Wave 2 benefits has allowed us to repurpose those individuals towards Scottish Child Payment. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts around about both the demand and the supply of recruitment, but it's that ability, in particular, sort of local delivery, to purpose these people towards Scottish Child Payment that gives us a level of comfort around our ability to deliver this. This does, again, back to the previous point I was making, we've still to see people come right through that virtual training, so we want to make sure that as they come through virtual training, they're productive, they're able to respond to client needs in the same way as people who have been through a kind of more traditional training and induction approach.
Okay, final question from myself, and then Mr. Arthur, if you still have a supplementary, will take you in after that. We've been talking about the technical delivery of this. Now, I really should remind anyone listening that this was about, for under sixes, and the first tranche of payments was £71 million a year going into the pocket of 170,000 of the poorest children in Scotland. That was before the COVID-19 pandemic, and 410,000 children overall once fully rolled out. So it's imperative that we get money into the pockets of the poorest families as quickly as possible, and I appreciate all the work that's taken place by Scottish Government and Social Security Scotland, but it'd be remiss of me not to mention the Save the Children Joseph Rowntree Foundation report that came out recently, which included a survey of 3,000 UK families, including 400 in Scotland, where the families had a child element of universal credit or child tax credits. They found that 65% of those families had mental health issues due to money concerns, that 61% had to borrow money to pay bills, and a variety of other really quite staggering figures about the impact of the poorest families with the COVID-19 pandemic. Save the Children and Joseph Rowntree Foundation made a suggestion that the UK government could have temporary £20 a week element universal credit or to child tax credits for the foreseeable future to mitigate some of these worst impacts of COVID-19 in the poorest families. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, I would support those calls, I should point that out quite strongly, but can I ask the Cabinet Secretary whether she's seeking to have any constructive conversations with the UK government to win that quite powerful argument? Cabinet Secretary?
Well, there have been a number of letters, as you can imagine, that have went back and forward between the Scottish and UK government over these issues. As I pointed out in my opening statement, many of the benefits, particularly low-income benefits, are reserved to the United Kingdom and government, and there are a number of different mechanisms which only the UK government can move forward with. For example, moves around changes to universal credit. One of the examples that has also been shown to have a very grave impact is the benefit cap, and the fact that many people will be suffering from the impacts of the benefit cap, which could be removed only by the UK government. There have been a number of letters, as I say, that I've went from myself to Therese Coffey and also from my colleagues Aileen Campbell and Kevin Stewart around various aspects of what could be done and we think should be done and can only be done at a UK government level. Unfortunately, the UK government hasn't sought to move on many of the issues that we brought up. They have made changes, and I would absolutely say from the outset that the Department of Work and Pensions is also working under extreme pressure at the moment, but they could still, even within the difficult circumstances, I do fully appreciate that they're working under, make a number of changes that could really assist families on low incomes at that time. You've raised some, Convener. I would add the benefit cap. There are indeed many more that I have raised in letters.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Mr. Arthur, I don't know if you want to come in at this point with a supplementary.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. It's just a very brief supplementary. I think we're all coming to terms with the fact that there was a pre-COVID world and a post-COVID world. I think in terms of any scenario planning for any government agency or the delivery of any government programme before COVID would have found it difficult to predict the sheer scale of the impact that the pandemic is having. And so one of the questions I want to ask and to get an understanding of, beyond the immediate impact that the pandemic is having upon the delivery of the Social Security programme, and in particular Scottish Child Payment, given that we can expect a huge increase in claimants in the coming months and into next year, what impact, of any, is that had upon delivery and policy aspirations with regards to Scottish Child Payment?
Well, the aspect which you raised quite rightly is, we are seeing the number of people that are on universal credit rising dramatically. That would, of course, therefore suggest that we will be seeing an increase in the number of people who will be eligible, for example, from the Best Start grant. This is something which we are aware will have a budget impact on the Scottish Government. It's a demand-led budget, and if people are eligible and apply, they will receive their payments, but that will have an impact. We're still modelling that at this time because I'm sure, as the committee can appreciate, it's still quite difficult to foresee what will be happening over the next few months in terms of what's happening with the economy. But I also recognise we have a responsibility to question, are we doing everything that we can to be able to ensure that people, many of which will be very new to the benefits system and might not know about the Best Start grant, are aware of it and are aware of their eligibility for it. That's why we're very keen to encourage further marketing and development of that, and also once the agency has the capacity to be able to do so, we fully intend to issue an invite to apply to those who are moving on to universal credit, who may not have been aware of the Best Start grant, Best Start Foods, to encourage them to take out applications. We would hope to do that soon, but it will be absolutely determined by when the agency feels that it is capable of taking on the obvious increased demand that will flow from those invite to apply letters. But we're taking our responsibilities to encourage that benefit take-up very seriously as well. And that's one of the ways we're looking at our policy as we move forward. The other aspects further down the line, I think, is something very much for the advisory board to look at, and one of the circles that will flow into the advisory board will be looking at, that's up to the circle, but what it looks for, but we would suggest it might want to look at what more can be done to maximise people's income. Now, that might be through social security, but as we're finding during this pandemic, social security isn't sometimes the quickest way of getting money to people. There might be other and better ways of doing that, but it's certainly something which I hope the advisory board will look at very seriously and come back with some bold recommendations on.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, Convener. I'll stop there.
Sorry, apologies, Mr. Arthur. Yeah, I was going to suggest that. Jeremy Balfour.
Good morning, Cabinet Secretary, and good morning, Committee. I wonder if I can move on to the child disability benefit and ask two questions. The first one is in regard to the draft regulations. Obviously, you published the draft regulations. They went out for comment. The Scottish Commission commented on them. They made some really quite interesting remarks, maybe about drafting and policy intent. And obviously, because of the crisis, we've had the delay. So I wonder, firstly, when do you think a fresh draft regulations will be available for scrutiny? And secondly, do you agree with me? Do you think it would be sensible for the Commission to look at those draft regulations again, as presumably there will be some fairly major changes in the light of their comments?
Well, I don't at this time intend to request the Commission to formally scrutinise another full set of the revised regulations, but we are looking to see whether, as a result of the replan and the decision to separate the child winter heating assistance regulations, that we may have to move with some revised provisions on child disability payments to the Commission. And my officials are engaging with the Commission Secretariat to discuss that further. As I mentioned in my statement to Parliament, I mean, it is hugely unfortunate that we've had to move the timings of when we had hoped to deliver the child disability benefit, and I don't at this point have a time frame that I would give committee for when we intend to respond to the Commission report, or indeed the laying of that. But we are moving forward, obviously, with the development of the child disability payment and looking very seriously at that. We have, of course, made some substantive policy changes for the child disability benefit as set out in the final draft of regulations that were provided to SCOS this year, and I am considering, of course, what the Commission's report did say, but I don't expect to involve major policy changes that would impact on the regulations at this time. And of course, when we hope to move forward with the child disability payments itself is still very much part of our replanning work, and I would have to get back to the committee in due course. Because as with many aspects which we'll touch on today, this is a joint programme between the Scottish Government and the DWP, and we obviously also need very close working with our colleagues in local authorities, for example, and health and social care before we can take on that work. So the timing of that is not entirely within our own gift.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up about, can I just then clarify, are DWP happy to continue to make these payments on behalf of Scottish Government? And have there been any discussions about how long that will go on for?
Yes, we've had discussions with the DWP. They're obviously being undertaken by agency agreement at this point, and given the very strange and exceptional circumstances that we're working under, there is an agreement that the DWP will continue to make payments until the Scottish Government is able to move forward with the introduction with that. As I say, we really do hope to do that as soon as is practically possible, but we are of course working very closely with DWP to understand their requirements as we move forward with the joint programme as well as our own, and that replanning work within both governments continues.
Thank you. The second area just to explore is around not just for child disability benefit, but maybe for all the new benefits that are coming forward. And that is in regard to case law, and what role will case law that has already been decided in tribunals. Now, obviously, there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment. Now, that doesn't mention it. And from my reading of the papers, and I may be wrong, there's a lack of clarity about what cases will apply, how will tribunals and upper tribunals apply case law, and will these appear in regulations, or are you planning other ways of making that legally binding on tribunals?
Well, this is, of course, a really important area to ensure that people's rights are respected and move forward. The Commission reports on the disability assistance for children and young people regulations. We're supportive of the approach that we've taken in relation to the inclusion of case law in those regulations. I would also point out that the Disability and Carers Benefits Expert Advisory Group, DACBIAG, has provided advice in that relating to the inclusion of existing UK case law and disability assistance for working age people regulations, and I'm currently considering that advice at that point, but certainly the work that they have done in this has been very helpful and very, very detailed on this, and I would thank them for that. We, of course, as well as the work that we're doing with the Commission and with DACBIAG, do continue to have ongoing discussions with stakeholders as we go through the pandemic. That work has not stopped, and we'll absolutely move forward with continuing to discuss with them the areas that they have the greatest concern on, areas where we feel that we're still needing more information on this area, because I do absolutely appreciate that it's an area which stakeholders are quite rightly pointing out that we need to get right first time as we move forward with the regulations, and we're determined to do just that.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Can we move to Alison Johnson now for the next question?
Thank you. Thank you, Convener, and good morning. I'd just like to ask in the first instance about the child winter heating assistance. The majority of payments to clients won't require an application to be made, but we do need data from the DWP. And I'm just wondering if the Cabinet Secretary regards that as any sort of barrier, given the pressure that they are under at the moment because of increases in demand for all sorts of benefits and payments.
Well, we haven't received that data as yet, that those arrangements aren't in place. but we are again working very closely with the DWP on this. They, of course, have to go through a lot of related replanning of their work, not just on areas that concern the devolution of benefits, but with their very, very large programme of work that they have in total. Once they've confirmed the dates that we can move forward with them to test this, then we'll be in a stronger position to agree when we can launch the child winter heating assistance. But as I said in my opening remarks, we do still intend and look forward to launching that this year. But it is reliant on that replanning work that the DWP are doing, and my officials, as you can imagine, are in very close contact with the DWP as they move forward with that replanning exercise, to ensure that there's no changes that they make within their wider programme that would have any adverse impact on our planning for child winter heating assistance.
Okay. Thank you, and appreciate to qualify the highest rate of the care element of child ELA is required. And I know that in April the Scottish Government announced a new system of disability benefits consultations rather than assessments per se, and at the time you said that a new service run by health professionals would be needed to implement the consultation system, and clearly the workload of professionals at the moment is immense. But I just wondered if you could give the committee an indication of what preparatory work might be underway to set up the new system, and if you could give an indication of when this new system of assessing eligibility might be online.
This obviously isn't required for the child winter heating assistance itself, so we can move forward with that. The time frame for this very much does depend on when we can access and hold discussions with colleagues in health and social care, and also within local authorities. We do need that level of practitioners to help with decision making, so I'm afraid I can't give any details of timeframes on that. As Alison Johnson can imagine, it's not something which we can forecast at this time. We are still moving forward with work that we can do and the preparatory work for the disability assistance packages. Some of that, of course, if it doesn't require the work of health and social care professionals, we can still do within programme behind the scenes. I can give committee further detail on that if required, or if that satisfies Alison Johnson at that point, then I'll leave it at that.
Okay, no, thank you. I'm grateful for that. It's just the proposed system does seem a lot fairer. So I'm sure you share my view that we don't want to delay that any longer than is necessary. But thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you, Convener.
Okay. Can I just check? I'm not sure if Mr. Dornan wants to follow up on any of that before I move to the next team of questions. Could you indicate, please, James?
I suspect I've just got one question around the data sharing arrangements. Are you comfortable with the data sharing arrangements you've got in place with the DWP, Cabinet Secretary?
I think they satisfy what we require to do at the moment. There's always a challenge of the fact that this is a moving feast, and once we have agreed what is needed for what we have at the moment, then we rapidly just move on to the next set of required asks of each government. So I think it's working well at this point. The work will obviously be impacted by COVID-19 and the UK and Scottish Government's requirement to replan, but certainly at this point I have no concerns around that aspect at the moment about how the work for child winter heating assistance or other data sharing agreements are moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the next theme, and it's Mr. Arthur, Tom Arthur.
Thank you very much, Convener. I wish to ask about the Job Start payment. Now, I appreciate, Cabinet Secretary, you said in your opening remarks that you're not able to give an exact date. And I'm not going to ask for a ballpark sort of figure, but if you are able to give one, that would be helpful. But I wonder if you can maybe unpack some of the work that still needs to be done and completed before the Job Start payment can begin.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you, Mr. Arthur, and I'm not even going to give a ballpark for that. I will say that we had hoped to have this launched already, but the obvious priority, as I stated in the Parliament some months ago now, was to ensure that we had stability within both the agency and the programme, and the thought of launching a benefit while everyone was still getting used to remote working and working from home was not a prospect that we felt was a sensible one for us to carry forward. So all I can say is that we do intend to roll out the Job Start payment when it can be safely managed by the agency, taking account of the other work that it's currently doing, and also the work that it requires to do, for example, around the invite to apply that I mentioned earlier. But work still does remain to be done on it. We've got some service design level work finalising, for example, the online application form and the guidance that will move with it from an operational perspective. We've got the publication of the policy impact assessments, and of course the agency has to make some final pre-launch preparations, such as making the changes to telephony and web chat services specifically for the Job Start payments. We'll obviously provide the committee with further detail about when I do hope to launch that as soon as we feel in a position that we have a level of confidence in that date that we'll move forward with.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Again, I appreciate my next question will be difficult to answer given all the uncertainty, but have you had any preliminary reflections upon the Job Start scheme, Job Start payment, in terms of its not just its delivery but its policy intentions and eligibility, given the expectation that we're going to see a significant rise in unemployment in the coming months? Have you had any preliminary thoughts or reflections on the Job Start scheme as a consequence of that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, as I hope the committee can be assured, we've looked at when social security in the round can be used as a tool to assist with the Scottish Government's response to the pandemic, and that was obviously shown in our work on the Carers Allowance supplement. The Job Start payment, I have asked officials to have a look at again, to sense check what could be done, because I absolutely do recognise particularly the challenges that young people might have in the labour market as we move forward. But I would point the committee to the fact that the Job Start payment is made, is legislated for in a very different way to the other benefits that we are moving forward to. So it was set out and requires a Section 63 order from the Westminster Parliament. Therefore, there are a number of areas that we cannot change. The Scottish Government does not have the ability to change. And this is, of course, because generally speaking, we don't have legislative competence over matters concerning employment support. So these had to be negotiated and agreed and move forward with that Section 63 order at Westminster. So, for example, we can't change residency, we can't change the age of applicants, and we can't change the fact that they to be not in employment and out of paid work for 6 months when they receive that job offer. So the eligibility conditions are set out in that Section 63 order that did take, as committee I'm sure will appreciate, a fair amount of time to work through the Westminster Parliament and had to be agreed by both governments. Therefore, it does not make this a simple matter for us to even look at what we would wish to change in our regulations and then build that into a regulated timetable within the Scottish Parliament. Many of the issues which committee and stakeholders may wish for us to look at are not within our gift to change unilaterally.
My final question, Cabinet Secretary, is just following up on that. Would it be far easier for the Scottish Government to respond if those powers rested with the Scottish Parliament?
Well, it took let's say a number of months, is putting it mildly, to agree the Section 63 order. These things just do make it much more difficult for us to be able to move forward with aspects if we're dealing with an area where we don't actually have the powers, and we had to negotiate that Section 63 to allow us to begin the Job Start payment. That makes it, as I demonstrated there, I hope, very difficult to change the eligibility, and indeed very difficult for us to move forward with anything remotely similar to that, because, as I say, we don't have the powers up here either. So if the Scottish Government would be looking to do something like this, it can't, because we don't have the ability to do so.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we move on, our Deputy Convener, Pauline Neal, possibly might be a supplementary on this. Pauline, can I just give you the opportunity? Do you still wish to pursue a supplementary on this particular theme?
Yeah, just very quickly. Cabinet Secretary, I mean, you've covered quite extensive ground with Tom Arthur. Thanks for that. Are you able to say what eligibility you want to change it to in relation to age of the applicant and not being in employment for 6 months?
Well, we can't change it, so we could make asks of the UK government, and it will be a matter of a year down the line before we actually have anything agreed, at which point everything's moved on. I mean, we're dealing with a hypothetical situation that we could spend a lot of time discussing, and we still wouldn't be able to move forward with in any remote way to deal with the impacts of COVID-19. So we haven't gone down the lines of looking at what to change, given the sheer timescale that it would require to make those changes. It's all, I'm afraid, rather too hypothetical, and I would rather my officials concentrated on the work that we can do rather than dealing with that hypothetical situation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Convener. We'll now move to the next theme. Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Convener. Morning, Cabinet Secretary. I wanted to just ask about council tax reduction and how that scheme interacts, particularly with universal credit claimants, as opposed to those on legacy benefits. The Cabinet Secretary will know that those on universal credit are sometimes worse off to varying degrees, because council tax reduction scheme doesn't quite align as well with universal credit. I just ask whether the Scottish Government know or have an estimate of the proportion of council tax reduction claimants who will be worse off because of the current rules don't work well with universal credit.
We don't have a recent estimate for that proportion of council tax reduction claimants that will get less CTR due to being on universal credit than if we were on legacy benefits. We do collect data on the number of cases, the value of awards and other data. It doesn't provide sufficient detail on earned income for all households who receive council tax reduction. The data covering 2020-21, obviously the period covering lockdown, will only be available through survey evidence, but not for some time. Current modelling predates the pandemic and therefore doesn't reflect the recent changes in caseload and composition that have happened and will continue obviously to happen this year and beyond. But we continue to review the analytical work in relation to council tax reduction, and as and when new data becomes available, that will of course be published, but it will take some time before we can robustly model the council tax reduction caseload that's been impacted and resulted from the pandemic.
Yeah, I know we don't have the most up-to-date figures, but we have seen from DWP that I think there are around 140,000 more people on universal credit from February this year up until April, and I expect that will probably have risen even further. And just to see if the Scottish Government had given any thought to any mitigation measures to support those people who have moved from legacy benefits to universal credit in recent times, who are potentially now losing out on council tax reduction.
So the scheme overall assists around 500,000 households to meet their council tax liability. We do believe it's been working well during the pandemic. Indeed, Citizens Advice Scotland published a survey on the 5th of June which showed the percentage of responses concerned about making council tax payments had fallen from 29% in April to 22% in May. But I would readily admit that's a figure that is still higher than I would like, but it does indicate that people are hopefully using the council tax reduction scheme. When it comes to Mr Griffin's questions around mitigation, our decision to not make any major adjustments to the current council tax scheme really do reflect that during the pandemic there is very limited operational capacity to deliver those changes within local authorities themselves. While some people are on universal credit may be getting less council tax than they would have done if they were on legacy benefits, these of course will be new claims.
Wonder then, finally, Cabinet Secretary, if the Scottish Government plan on monitoring levels of debt in council tax, just to keep a watching eye on whether that is increasing or not, just to keep a handle on whether there is an issue on those new universal credit claimants having issues with making their commitments to council tax payments.
Well, certainly we're concerned overall about the issue of debt and the financial impact that the pandemic will have. That's of course why we have called on the UK government to retain the job retention scheme for as long as it is required, because there is obviously a concern that if that were to end too early, certainly for many sectors, then we will see further increase in unemployment and a build-up of financial difficulty from that. So we are keeping a very close eye on that, not just within the management information or information that we have within government, or indeed the discussions we're having with local authorities, but also with a number of stakeholders who will be on the very front line of the dealing with the issues that people are having around financial debt. So both at a government level, our relations with local authorities and our stakeholders, we are endeavouring to keep up to speed as very much as we can about the impact that this is having on people's lives as it moves forward.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you, Camilla.
Okay, thank you. Move to the next line of questioning, and it will be Graham Simpson to be followed by Keith Brown.
Thank you, Convener. I was going to ask some questions about staffing, but that's been covered earlier. So if I can just ask a couple of questions about budgets. The administrative budget for Scottish Social Security has actually gone down, which is a bit of a surprise, by £26 million. I just wonder if you can tell us what effect that's had.
Have been because of the replanning work that we've taken forward. So, for example, there's been no staff recruitment over the last 3 months in line with the guidance from British Government. We've also, of course, not been able to move forward with some of the work we would have been doing around the disability assistance packages as well. If there's aspects around the agency's budget in particular that Mr Simpson would like to drill down on, I'm sure David Wallace would be quite happy to pick that up. But in essence, it's because of the changes to the replanning work and our requirement to have less staff on, and indeed our ability to get staff through the door, and the replanning work that we've done within programme has required the budget to change. Rather than, we've not changed the programme because of a problem with budget. It's been the replanning that's dictated that budgets are not required at this time.
Okay, I understand that. Does Mr Wallace have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess just to reiterate that point that the Cabinet Secretary has made, the vast majority of our administrative budget at the moment covers people. And as we'd covered earlier on, there was a chunk of our new colleagues were being brought in for Scottish Child Payment. we honoured those contracts, we honoured those commitments, and have been bringing them over the period of lockdown. But the agency has been in constant recruitment since it was established, and those later recruitment campaigns were effectively paused as lockdown came. So that money hasn't been required. So from an agency perspective, it's not an impact in the sense that we are having to sort of make decisions based around that budget. It's the opposite, effectively, that those budget reflects the decisions that we've made.
Right, thank you. If I can ask a question about the budget for the Scottish Welfare Fund, there was an extra £45 million, and this is a question for the Cabinet Secretary, an extra £45 million put into that. 22 million of that 45 million went to councils straight away, and the rest was held back. So that's 23 million held back. So what's happened to that 23 million? What are you planning to do with it?
So you're quite right to say that we phased the money that's went into that, and first tranche of money is with local authorities and is dealing with the increase in demand that they've seen for crisis grants. The remainder money, we will look to see how that needs to be distributed. And the reason for it being in two phases was, quite frankly, we simply didn't know how this was going to impact on local authorities, whether there would be a different geographical spread to pressures, whether we needed to phase that money in and distribute that money in a different method than the normal formula. As I say, that would depend on the impacts of COVID-19 in different areas. So the money remains within government, and should it require to be drawn down, it absolutely sits there for local authorities to draw down. And when we're nearing that point, obviously, of that money being required by local authorities, then we'll obviously have discussions with COSLA about how that would be distributed.
So when you say about it could be distributed in a different method to normal, what do you mean by that?
So, for example, it's distributed by a formula that's based on SIMD. That seems a very sensible way forward for regular times. These are not regular times, so if there was to be a very large requirement, be that for public health issues or employment issues, where we were seeing a greater increase in one geographical area to another, it might be sensible for us to vary how we distribute that rather than using normal practices. So because we're not living in normal times, it would seem sensible just to have a little bit of a sense check to see whether there's a fairer way to distribute that, bearing in the circumstances that local authorities find themselves in. So I suppose it's a way of ensuring that we have maximum flexibility to deal with very strange circumstances that we're all working under.
It sounds like you might be asking for councils to put in bids.
No, not necessarily. As I say, this is about maintaining maximum flexibility and to see how things are developing across the country. They may not develop in an even way, and therefore I think it makes sense for us to have that flexibility at this time.
Okay, just one final question from myself, and it's around staff. It is around staffing and how staff are coping with having to work from home. Because that's not always the easiest thing, and particularly when you've got a whole army of new people, over 200 of them. How are they managing on a practical day-to-day basis?
Well, I'll bring again David Wallace in to talk a little bit about the agency, but I'll begin by paying tribute to the staff both within the Social Security Directorate in Government and the agency, who have moved exceptionally quickly to work in very difficult circumstances and have delivered, in terms of the agency, still exceptionally high performance for the clients that they're there to serve. And I'd pay particular tribute to the extra 200 staff who have only met each other and indeed everybody else virtually since they started. There is a great deal of work going on to ensure that both the Directorate and agency staff are supported. We ensure, I've had a number of all staff calls where we have around 1,700 staff from agency and the Directorate there to listen to me for a bit, but that's probably not the most important part, but it's asking questions of myself and the Directorate, and the directors and deputy directors are very keen that we support people through this. As committee will know from their personal experiences, it is not easy working from home, and we're asking many people to work from home that have not done that before. Many of our staff have caring responsibilities, and we take our commitment to them to support them at that time and to support their welfare very seriously. But it is a difficult time because, and again I'd point to the programme as one example, they are used to working in a very collegiate way of all getting around the table and getting our programme developed in a collegiate manner, and that's all obviously been moved online. And same with our policy officials, everyone's working in a very different way. So we do take it very, very seriously, but they are, as I say, performing well. Yes, the fact that we have people working from home means that they are not working, say, their usual hours, and we support them during that, and that has meant limitations to what we can achieve. But I would pay tribute to everything that they're doing under very difficult circumstances to still move forward and achieve so much this year, both within the agency and the Directorate. But I'll stop there and let David Wallace pick up on some of the work done within the agency, particularly perhaps some of the new ways of working that they've developed in terms of telephony and web chats, etc., and their support to colleagues overall.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and yeah, I guess just to put on record, what I say go for the agency covers probably the programme and policy colleagues as well, but enormously proud of the work that's been done in very strange circumstances. As the Cabinet Secretary says, our staff has similar childcare, caring responsibilities, so we have been very flexible when people have been able to work, when they haven't been able to work. I think as well as people coming in new to the organisation for the first time, we've had previous conversations at the committee that we quite deliberately reached out sometimes and brought people into that cohort of new starts who had perhaps been further away from a job market for a while. And when we first spoke to these people, I was enormously pleased that we'd got backgrounds from there for people who possibly hadn't worked for a number of years or had caring responsibilities. So again, we've deliberately sort of got a sort of workforce that mirrors society more generally. So inevitably they have these responsibilities. I mean, in addition to some of the things the Cabinet Secretary has said, the all staff calls, we're delighted when the Cabinet Secretary can join these, but we do have our own sort of sequence of doing these routinely as well. I think we've done in the agency about 6 of these now, again mirrored elsewhere, so that's an opportunity for what is now a fairly large organisation to be all together at the same time, albeit virtually. We've done some really good work, for example, around about with CME Scotland, and getting some really good results back there around about mental health and how we've worked with that organisation. And the initial report back from them is really, really positive as well. I think one of the few organisations that's seeing sort of positive indicators across all of their sort of framework. We also were one of the organisations that very early decided to do a very sort of pulse survey about how people were feeling, so that we could deliberately sort of take actions and have a plan around about how people were working. And just two very quick things just to sort of say as well. I mean, on the individual staffing element, I particularly enjoyed, we've introduced effectively a random 15-minute call with people, which is fantastic. But I should also just very briefly say a word about web chat, which the Cabinet Secretary has mentioned. Introducing an actually quite a significant change in a new business process during lockdown has been a huge achievement. And that web chat, the ability for clients to speak online directly to a client advisor, has been welcomed both by clients and by our client advisors as well. Telephony, I could say a little bit of word about that, because we're clear that introducing web chat, we have to keep all the channels open to our clients. That's one of our commitments as well. So that remains a bit of a challenge. But that's a flavour of some of the activities that we've been doing. I'm conscious of your time, but I could say much more around about the good work that the teams are doing on that.
It's very impressive. Thank you very much, Convener.
Okay, I think you get good value for money there, Mr. Simpson. We've got a couple of questions before we close this session. The final theme will be led by our Deputy Convener Pauline McNeill shortly, but can I take Keith Brown in at this point? Keith Brown, MSP.
Thanks, Convener. Just to say, I think it's commendable that the agency and the government have managed to achieve a £27 million reduction in admin costs, whilst at the same time taking the care they are over the staff. But given that, and given the earlier responses about concentrating on making sure the monies go out for the benefits which are currently being paid, which I think is the right emphasis, and also given the Cabinet Secretary's inability, for obvious reasons, to give a timescale for future benefits, ones due to be paid in 21-22, is she able to say anything further about the work planning that's been done by staff in relation to that timetable? You can't be more detailed about the timetable itself for obvious reasons.
Well, I'll perhaps bring in Alison Byrne from Programme to talk about some of the work that the programme's doing this year. I mentioned briefly that there is still a lot of preparatory work that's going on and that's required to be done before we launch Scottish Child Payment. So there are major launches and go live dates that we'll be moving forward this year. And that's obviously doesn't involve a go live date for a benefit, but does involve substantial pieces of work around cross-cutting. So Alison can give you a flavour of what's happening this year. We don't have the ability to give a timetable at this point going forward, but what we are absolutely determined to do is keep moving forward with what we can do and what is within our own control. And with your permission, Convener, we can bring in Alison to give you, I think, a flavour, given the time constraints we have today, a flavour of what we are determined to move forward with that shows how we're still delivering where we can and where we have the ability to do so.
Thanks, Cabinet Secretary. Good morning, committee. Yeah, as the Cabinet Secretary said, one of the key priorities for delivery this year in the programme is the Scottish Child Payment. It's not a straightforward benefit to deliver, and we'll be doing that over 3 significant releases, one in July, one in September, and then obviously towards the end of the year. The committee touched on before the expectation that applications to Social Security Scotland would increase as a result of the COVID situation. So one of the key priorities in the programme at the moment is overall to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the agency's systems so that they can cope with that. So the releases for Scottish Child Payment do much more than just support the end-to-end benefit delivery. It also takes a whole swathe of functionality around, for example, redeterminations and appeals, around finance, fraud, error and debt, what we tend to call in the programme the cross-cutting services. So it's a huge piece of work. In addition to that, we've also put in place a new continuous improvement team that will be on the ground in June, and that team will look at the agency's existing processes and how we can make those more efficient and effective to ensure the agency is in as strong a position as possible to respond to the current crisis. And we're also bringing forward delivery of a range of cross-cutting services that would have been delivered as part of the Wave 2 benefits in order to further enhance the low-income benefits and provide support for the disability benefits as we go forward. And then in addition, as the Cabinet Secretary's outlined this morning, we're still continuing with the build for child window heating assistance and job start payment, which we're hopeful that we can also launch by the end of this year. So it's a full delivery programme for the remainder of the year in 2020 in the programme. As the Cabinet Secretary said, we're taking forward impacting and planning in relation to the disability benefits, but there's still such a high degree of uncertainty that that work will be ongoing for some time to come.
Okay, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, given the time constraints, that's all from me, Convener, thanks.
Okay, I think it probably overlaps a little bit with our Deputy Convener's theme. Thank you for your patience, Pauline McNeill, MSP.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, it's been largely covered, and Cabinet Secretary, it's quite incredible pressure for your staff and the social security system to be under. I mean, that's taken for, well, as read. Is there any modelling done? I mean, it is a follow-on from Brown's questioning about how much the timetable is really going to shift here. And I know there are so many uncertainties here, it is hard to give the committee any indication. Obviously, we're concerned because, as we previously debated many times, the importance of having these powers and how we can do things differently is also going to be significantly delayed. My question, Cabinet Secretary, is there modelling ongoing then as to different scenarios? So at the moment we've lost 3 months, and so going forward it looks like that's going to be into 6 months. We don't know what the end game is, but I wondered that there must be people somewhere analysing a 3-month loss, what that looks like, a 6-month loss, what does that look like? Obviously the concern is if it's going to be more than a year's delay. Could you even say that that's a possibility or not? Thank you.
Yeah, as Pauline McNeill has said herself, and I'm sure the committee is aware, we really can't give timetables, even rough indicative timetables at this point. As I said earlier, there is so much of this that's not within our gift, so we need to work jointly with the DWP, and as I said, they are, and I fully appreciate this, under extreme at the moment, and therefore the DWP themselves are not in the position to be able to work with my officials to replan to the scale that we would under normal circumstances do, and both governments are determined to take that forward, but we just cannot do it at this time. One of the key aspects that we do have, as I've said to committee, I think on previous occasion, is around when we can get access to the health and social care staff that we require to allow us to be able to take forward the design work to that consultation process that Alison Johnson mentioned in her question earlier. So we can do some things without that, but there comes a point where we can't move forward with that, because the whole purpose of what we're trying to do is ensure that that is done in a very different way and with health professionals right at the centre of that. So much of what we're looking to do depends on when we can start getting access and have the types of really detailed conversations that we wanted to do. So much of it is around when that starts, not just how much time has passed since lockdown. The other important aspect is, of course, around data sharing agreements with local authorities and with the NHS. And again, as Pauline McNeill knows, absolutely, I know this. It's not like local authorities or NHS boards are sitting with spare capacity and time to look at the data sharing agreements that we require. So those are the two main stumbling blocks that we have around getting our ducks in a row up in Scotland, and you then put the added complication in about dealing with the DWP as well. And I'm afraid I just don't have the ability to give that new timetable, and that replanning work obviously has taken place within the programme about what we can take forward ourselves and how quickly we can do it, but without those moving pieces actually being in a position where I know where they're going to be in a couple of months' time, we just can't take it really much forward than that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Pauline?
No.
Okay. Sorry you had to wait to the end there to get in. It's not ideal doing things in a virtual setting. Thank you for all MSP's patience, but more importantly, thank you to Shirley Ann Somerville and your team here this morning, and to David Wallace, Chief Executive of Social Security Scotland. We know it's challenging. We're determined as a committee to continue to scrutinise in an appropriate fashion delivery of Social Security Scotland benefits and Scottish Government policy commitments. We get these are challenging circumstances, and we get you may feel we keep asking the same questions where you say you can't give us the clarity that we desire, but it's the purpose of our committee to monitor that and to keep asking those questions. But we'll seek to work collegiately and constructively where we can. But we need to get as much certainty as we can in our role as Scotland Social Security Committee. So thank you all our witnesses this morning. We now move to agenda item 4, which is consideration of evidence that we've heard just momentarily there at agenda item 3. We've agreed to take that in private. We now move into private session, and that will be on a different platform, so we'll see MSP shortly on another platform. We now move into private session. Thank you.